friends, welcome back to Something's Happening Here. Today is Wednesday, if you're watching this as it is broadcast in real time, and we're continuing our discussion of God's Rottweiler, the life and ministry and death of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, who passed away a few weeks ago. We have a lot to talk about today, so I'm just going to get right to it. I apologize if we run a little bit long. The article we're going to start with today is from the Daily Mail, just like the one we looked at yesterday. This one, the title is Pope Benedict XVI's Personal Secretary to Publish Tell-All Book, which will lift the lid on mysteries and scandals that sullied the reputation of the pontiff he stood by for nearly 3 decades. Okay, so I'm not going to read more into this article. It really just tells about this archbishop who wrote the book and is really building anticipation for the book, which is supposed to be released for purchase later on this month. So whether or not you want to go buy that book is up to you, and now you know that it's out there. The reason that I chose this for today is because of the idea that we are about to find out some truth, alleged, supposed truth from the perspective of this person, about scandals. It's the scandals that are going to be revealed. So the very first paragraph from the article is the only one I'm going to read, but Pope Benedict XVI's personal secretary has written a tell-all book which will reveal the mysteries and scandals that sullied the reputation of a pontiff best known for his historic resignation. So far this week, we have seen that there is a theological war happening within the Catholic Church, as kind of exemplified by Pope Benedict, who passed away, and Pope Francis, who's still alive. And I have made the claim that each of those men represent the spirits of the spirit of the South and North, so that we see that theological battle raging even inside of the Catholic Church. We saw yesterday that the prayer that Francis offered for Benedict was laden with imagery, with Catholic doctrine that does not match up to the Bible. And now we're seeing that there were legit scandals and mysteries, so to speak, surrounding this person, surrounding the church, the head of the largest church in the world. So when we put all of these ideas together, we realize that something's happening here. We realize that there's something underneath the surface that's almost screaming for our attention. What in the world could it be? Is it just inevitable that an organization of the size and scope of the Catholic Church would just inevitably fall into this kind of chaos? Or is there something more sinister happening? I would like to take you to the book of Daniel, chapter 7. And if you've been a watcher of Something's Happening Here, you will have heard me reference Daniel 7 a lot, but we've never actually spent time in it. I reference it because of a phrase that we've looked at a few times. The phrase is, a time, times, and half a time. And I have made the claim that this refers to a long literal period of 1,260 years in the real world. So we're going to look at Daniel 7. We're going to see that phrase, but we're going to really be gathering a whole bunch of information out of Daniel 7 because there's a character there that I want us to reveal. And I'll just tell you right now, this is a 2-part revealing. So we're going to gather the information today and then get to the punchline tomorrow. But if you will join me in Daniel chapter 7, please, that's where we're going to spend our time today. Why would there be theological battles and scriptural blasphemies and mysteries and scandals? Like, why would all of this be circulating in this institution? In Daniel 7, we are introduced to a character that is referred to as a little horn. And in kind of scholarly circles, it's referred to as the little horn, right? But what's going on here is Daniel chapter 7 is a parallel to Daniel chapter 2. And if memory serves me correctly, I think we actually have talked about Daniel 2 at some point in the past here on this program. But that was a dream given to the king of Babylon, which was interpreted by a Jewish prophet named Daniel. And the substance of that dream was a prophetic view of history in between that moment in time when Babylon was in power and the eventual return of Jesus Christ. And the very short version of that flow of history is Babylon will be succeeded by another kingdom, Medo-Persia, which is succeeded by Greece, which is succeeded by Rome. And nobody conquers Rome. It simply falls apart, right? So that's really the end of that kind of conquest history. Rome just ends. And in its place are 10 people groups that are represented by 10 toes on the statue given in Daniel chapter 2. These 10 people groups spread out from the ruins of Rome into northern and western Europe, and they become the countries that we know today. For example, the Franc people grew up into the land that we know today as France. The Saxon people traveled all the way north. They intermingled with the Anglo people, and now we have the Anglo-Saxon British people, right? So this is where all that came from, and Daniel 2 is the kind of the... it's a summary of all of that in very basic terms. So Daniel 7 is that same thing again. It's that same flow of history from Babylon all the way down to the return of Jesus. But we get a lot more detail here. And I'm just going to quickly walk us through it. Verse 2, 2 and 3 set up the idea that we're going to be looking at 4 different beasts. Those beasts will correspond to Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And so those 4 beasts we're going to see here. And then the first one is in verse 4. It was like a lion. It had eagle's wings. That represents Babylon, if we take the time to really study that out. Verse 5 is a bear, which is raised up on one side and has in its mouth 3 ribs. That is Medo-Persia. Medo-Persia had to conquer 3 major areas in order to rise to power. That's the 3 ribs in its mouth. The reason it's raised up on one side is because Medo-Persia was a combination of 2 kingdoms that were working in concert, but Persia was much more dominant than Media. So by the end of their partnership, it was just the Persian Empire, right? So the bear has one dominant side. Verse 6 is a third beast, a leopard with 4 wings on its back and 4 heads. And that is Greece, because when Alexander, the first king of Greece, died, the kingdom was subdivided into 4 smaller kingdoms, all of which were called Greece. And so that's the imagery of the 4 wings and the 4 heads there. So after Greece, any student of history knows that Rome comes to power. Rome conquered Greece in pieces until it was dominant. And that's who we meet in verse 7. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all of the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Those 10 horns will correspond to the same 10 people groups that were represented by the toes of the statue back in Daniel chapter 2. So we see this parallel imagery all over the place. And we might even have a graphic that will kind of illustrate that for you. So we'll see what the producer can come up with. But these are parallel. And so far, it is a point-by-point match along this parallel. Once we hit verse 8, however, we start getting different details. Verse 8 says, I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. So we want to gather as much information as we can about that little horn and try to determine who or what God is revealing to us with this prophetic language. So, from verse 8, we got a lot of data already. We know that it comes up among the other 10 horns, which we have already established go on to become the nations of Western and Northern Europe, right? So it's in Europe somewhere. We also know it is smaller than the other 10 horns. It's called little, right? So it's going to be a unit that is smaller than England, smaller than France, smaller than Italy, smaller than Portugal even, right? We know from that same verse that it ultimately uproots and destroys 3 of those 10 horns. So we're looking for some sort of murderous power here, genocidal power even. It's going to wipe out 3 distinct people groups. It has the eyes of a man. We don't really know what that means, but it seems to imply that there's some sort of man at its head. He speaks pompous words, which is blasphemy, right? So he's speaking things that are contrary to God, implicitly in the name of God, right? And we get all of that just from verse 8. So now we'll jump down to verse 11. Actually, that doesn't actually give us any new information. Verse 20 doesn't give us any new information, so we have to actually jump down to verse 24, I think, to find new information. Verse 24 says, the 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the first ones, and shall subdue 3 kings. From that, the new information we get is that the little horn arises after the other 10. Well, up to a certain point, those 10 people groups were part of the Empire of Rome. So in order for them to be distinct horns unto themselves, we have to be looking after the fall of Rome. So that verse tells us we're looking for something that comes into existence after 476 AD, which is when Western Rome fell apart. Then in verse 25, we're told the following, he shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, shall intend to change times and law, and then the saints shall be given into his hand for, and this is where we find that really mysterious phrase we've used a number of times, for a time and times and half a time. So, we're told he speaks pompous words or blasphemy. That's not new. But he also persecutes God's people. He's a persecuting force acting in the name of God against God's people. Yikes. We are told he thinks to change God's timing and his law. And I like the word there. He shall intend is what my version says. Shall intend to change times and law. Other translations actually say he thinks to change times and law. Because can you change God's law? No. You can think about it, but good luck actually doing it, right? And then that last thing, he shall reign for a time, times, and half a time. And how do we get a literal period of 1260 years out of that? Well, in the following way. Go quickly to the book of Ezekiel with me, chapter 4, I believe. Ezekiel chapter 4. That sets up a prophetic principle for us. Ezekiel 4, starting in verse 4, God says to the prophet, lie also on your left side, lay the iniquity of the house of Israel upon it. According to the number of the days that you lie on it, you shall bear their iniquity. For I have laid on you the years of their iniquity, according to the number of the days, 390 days. So you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Israel. Verse 6, and when you have completed them, lie again on your right side, then you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days. I have laid on you a day for each year. This is a prophetic principle that we run into over and over. When God gives us a prophetic time period, the imagery that he uses is one prophetic day to represent one literal earthly year. So a time times and half a time is 3.5 years, right? If you look up that word in the Hebrew dictionary, time, it very plainly indicates 1 year. So it's 1 year plus times without a numerical antecedent there. That means 2 years. So 1 plus 2 plus half, right? That's 3.5. 3.5 years. The Jewish mind, the ancient Jewish mind, had 360 days in a given year because they had a lunar calendar, or 30 days for their month according to the lunar cycle there. And so 360 days times 3.5 years, right, equals 1,260 days. And when you do the day for a year prophetic principle, that leaves us with 1,260 literal years. So, to close out today, I just want to summarize what we've learned so far about this little horn, and then when you come back tomorrow, we will reveal the whole thing. The little horn is in Europe somewhere, comes into existence or power or dominance after 476 AD, smaller than the European nations, is responsible for uprooting 3 of the 10 people groups that fell out of Rome, so it's genocidal there, is a man at its head, speaks blasphemy, is somehow different than the other 10, right? And persecutes God's people, thinks but does not succeed in changing God's timing and his law, and is in power for 1,260 years. Who is it? The only clue I'm going to give you today is that if you are thinking about who it could be, you're probably right. Because there's only one, literally only one figure in all of human history that fulfills all 10 of these distinguishing characteristics. So if you've got something or someone in your mind, you are probably correct. But come back tomorrow and we'll see if you are truly correct. So I'm Steve Hicks. This has been a difficult but hopefully edifying prophetic journey with you today. And when you are subscribed fully, then we will see you tomorrow. That means like the Facebook page and change your notifications to be alerted when we publish stuff. Or on YouTube, press the subscribe button and the notification bell. And on talkingdonkeyinternational.org, go to the podcast page and bookmark it. God bless you all. I will see you tomorrow here on Something's Happening Here. I'm Steve Hicks.